Welcome to my channel. In this video, I want to talk about the difference between needs and desires. Now, you may think, why is this such an important subject? Because, in my opinion, if you can understand the foundational structure of something, it really changes your awareness of many different aspects of a person's life. When we talk about needs versus desires, we're talking about a very foundational aspect of human existence. This gets confused oftentimes, especially when you're talking about different attachment styles. The process of attachment, the process of development of a child, right? Because when you're experiencing those foundational moments of your existence, a lot of it has to do with your needs. And those needs and how they were met will also inform you of your relationship with other people, but also they will make way for your adult self finding and forming desires. Now, let me explain. When we talk about needs, we're talking about the foundational needs for specific things that are absolutely necessary to have certain things happen in life. So, for example, let's talk about basic foundational survival needs, right? So, a need for a blanket to be warm, or a need for nurturance, so for a hug, for a child to be held, a need for safety, a need for belonging is very important. Like, these needs are set forth in the very beginning of a person's existence. Going back to conception, right? So how did the parents feel about the child the moment they recognized that they're pregnant, right? Were they happy about this? Were they scared? Were they unsure, right? What happens is that the child actually receives like a sponge. It starts to absorb the environment and the experiences of the environment and in relationship to itself. So when a child is conceived and the mom and dad are not sure how they feel about each other, and having a child means that they're basically stuck with one another potentially for the rest of their life, being parents, right? And if they're not sure about that, that's one way that they can start to experience fear, and fear blocks love. When they may be scared they're not going to have enough resources for a child, that also creates fear, also blocks love. And so then when the child experiences all of these things, their need for being like belonging starts to get compromised, because their existence is now a threat to the people that are going to be taking care of them, right? And of course, it's not a conscious experience, it's an emotional experience, because emotions emit a certain frequency, and the child, even before birth, will start to experience what that feels like, what that environment feels like towards themselves. And so if they start to feel that, oh, my mom and dad aren't happy that I'm alive, and the process of me developing and then being born, there's mixed feelings about that, for example, or one of the parents isn't interested. So this basic need of being accepted, belonging, being wanted, a basic need. It's not like I desire to be wanted when you're a kid. No, that's a need, because if you're not wanted, you're going to die. You're not going to survive. And that's what creates the trauma, what is called in therapy a schizoid, or the leaving pattern, where the child is born, but at the same time, they have one foot in and one foot out, where they have a physical body, they have existence, but they feel like they don't quite belong. They feel like an alien. They feel like they don't relate to the world. They have a hard time making money, or creating material success, or being connected to the material world, because their experience of moving towards the material world was compromised because of that rejection. So their need for acceptance, belonging was compromised, right? And so then there's other needs, for example, need for substance, right? Needs for food and that in the beginning of life, that is mother's milk most of the time, better case scenario, and then, or formula in a lesser scenario. Oftentimes it's about I have a need and how well is this need satisfied. This is a foundational need, which of course then affects a lot of the relationship with substance, how well the person connects to knowing what they want to eat or what satisfies them, right? What kind of substance will satisfy them. All those things are really dependent on the consistency and how well the parents were able to meet those needs for a child, right? When those needs aren't met on a regular basis, or let's say the needs of everyone else outshine the needs of the child starts to shut down their needs. They have a negative association with needs, right? Because not only their needs are not met, but also when other people's needs take the spotlight, they don't have a positive association with needs at all. So they want to push needs aside, right? And that's kind of like having a car without gas, right? It's like the car needs gas in order to move, in order to drive. And if it doesn't have gas, it can't go. Now, if you have a desire to get to a certain destination, how can you get to that destination with a car without any gas in it? Right? So either you have to start to learn to meet your needs indirectly somehow, right? So food becomes more of a object that keeps you going, kind of thing. So you do need food, so you feed yourself, but you're not really connected to it, right? And that's where the desire comes in, because desire cannot exist until the needs are met, right? Otherwise, desires become compensatory. So, for example, like drugs, right? People have certain desire for drugs or for sex, right? Or television that just numbs you out, or social media. But what they're actually doing is they're substituting their needs for something specific with this other pseudo kind of food. So, for example, a drug can substitute a need for a hug, like heroin, for example. It's been associated with this feeling of being hugged. Cocaine is associated with power, so their need for power, right? Those types of things. And emotional eating, that food is now a substitute for another need that you may have. And these we start to call emotional addictions, right? And these emotional addictions are essentially these pseudo needs, these pseudo ways to satisfy these needs um, without actually getting the very substance that you actually require in order for you to feel grounded, satisfied, nurtured, and nourished. It's a difference between eating an apple and eating a piece of candy, right? One has substance, vitamins, right? You actually benefit from it. And the other one gives you a feeling, right? But it actually hurts you in the long run, right? And so this is super important because as we learn our relationship to needs, we also recognize needs of others, right? And that's what really makes a good parent is someone who's really connected with their own needs and the needs of their own inner child, right? And as adults, we learn to satisfy our own needs, but also learn to communicate those needs to people that we are in a relationship with, right? So, for example, some of the needs for safety is consistency. So when a child doesn't get consistency with their parents say, I'll be home at 5, but they're not there for hours. Or they say, I'll be home at 5 and they're home at 7. Or all of a sudden they disappear, they go on a trip and they go to a hospital or something like that, and the child isn't informed, right? What that creates is this dysregulation of the nervous system. And for a child, there are specific needs in order to help the nervous system be regulated, right? For example, consistency, as I mentioned already. So, for example, saying like, I'm going to go for a walk. I'll be back when you're watching a cartoon, when the cartoon is over. The parent says, okay, the cartoon is 30 minutes long. I have my own need to take some space for myself. So I'm going to inform the child that I'll be back by the time the cartoon is over. So the adult is taking responsibility for their needs, but it's also taking responsibility for the needs of the child because the child is under the care of the parent, right? Now, if the parent doesn't actually know how to take responsibility for their own needs, so for example, they may feel the need to take some time for themselves, but they don't really understand that's actually what they are looking for, and they're just reacting, right? So they're numbing out to the needs of the child, and they're not really communicating well. And what that does for the child is it sets the stage that their needs are important. They can't trust people that they're in relationships with. And so then, of course, that creates an issue when they grow up and they start to have inconsistency in their relationship. Now, obviously, as a child, you can't communicate your needs to your parents because you're just getting to know them, just getting to know your own needs, right? And this is where a lot of confusion comes in because you're getting to know your needs through your parents, right? And if your parents aren't very connected to needs, well, you're not going to be very connected. But now what? You find yourself as an adult and you find yourself in relationships with other adults. Now, you're either in a relationship where some of those needs aren't being met, oftentimes the same way they weren't met when you were a child, right? So some of those could be that your partner can communicate when they'll be home. So that need for consistency is there. Or, for example, the need for safety in the relationship where your partner is sharing their sexual energy outside of the relationship. That breaks the container of the relationship. And so that creates a safety issue there, right? That's also a violation of safety and also compromises those needs. So you got to take a look at your relationship and see where are you in relationship to your needs and in relationship to your partner. And as an adult, what we need to do is we need to get to know our own needs. And of course, in the beginning, those needs are going to be bigger. So, for example, if I haven't gotten autonomy as a child, right? If my mom had, let's say, a lot of needs and she projected those needs at me and made me responsible, what I'm going to feel is a big need for space, a big need for autonomy, a big need not to take responsibility for other people, right? And if I'm reacting to that need, I may take space and not really communicate with my partner. I may feel resentment towards my partner's needs, right? And so then what's important, if I know that those are my needs, instead of reacting to them, I need to communicate. So for example, I say, listen, I feel overwhelmed. I need some time for myself. I'm going to take the evening and go to the other room and watch a movie by myself. Or I'm going to take a 2 hour walk. Or I feel like I need to take a trip, a solo trip, and take a weekend off and just do something for myself, right? So you're communicating that. On the other side, and we're talking uh, attachment styles like avoidant versus anxious attached, right? So on the other side is often the anxious, which has a different need. And the anxious attached need is that inconsistency. It's like, are you going to be there when you say you're going to be there? Can I rely on the fact that there's consistency in communication and our connection with one another? And so the need is, for example, is to, oh, can you let me know if you're going to be late? Right? So, for example, you're taking responsibility of that need and you're communicating that need. Or when you take your weekend trip, can you call me at least once during that trip and just give me 10 minutes of connection? Right? So now you're building that, you're giving that inner child those needs. that are being satisfied. At the same time, you're not making the person responsible. And what that looks like for an avoidant, for example, is to say, "Oh, you're smothering me. You leave me alone. Like you're too much," right? So we're projecting all of these feelings onto our partner, right? Instead of actually saying that I feel a need and this is what my need is, right? And then you're clearly communicating some of those boundaries and you're becoming partners, right? On the other side, it's the same thing. You're taking responsibility for your needs, but you're also taking responsibility for communicating them, right? And so the more that both of the inner children gets regulated, the easier it starts to become in the relationship with one another, right? So, for example, the anxious avoidant starts to feel, wow, my autonomy is really respected, right? That they value my individuality, my autonomy. So now that my autonomy doesn't feel so threatened. So now I feel more comfortable leaning in and being closer because I know that I can always speak up for myself if it does feel like I'm being smothered. And I'm starting to trust this person to be more attuned to my needs and take more responsibility for theirs. Right. And the same thing goes the other way. It's like, well, I consistently asked for what I needed, but this person is now, I can trust them, that I know that when I feel anxious, that they haven't called or something happens, I know that they've consistently shown me that they show up and I'm important to them. Right. And now I can relax and then take care, and my inner child can relax as well. So you as an adult take care of your inner child, but you're also using the relationship in order to heal each other, right? And so the relationship becomes like this bubble of intimacy. And when one person feels dysregulated in relationship to the other person, it's the bubble of intimacy that gets compromised. And so instead of pointing fingers and saying like you didn't do this for me, you should have, you never show up when I ask you to, or especially when you start using that type of language of always or never, you're in a trigger. But instead saying that I feel that our bubble of intimacy needs some care, right? Like my side feels um, a bit alone or neglected. And this is the story that I tell myself that you don't care or that I'm not important to you. And that brings up that history that I had with my mom or dad when they were inconsistent, right? So I just want to check, like, is that bringing up something for you? Is that familiar? Can you meet me here? Can I share this with you without making it your responsibility? But can I share this with you and bring you into my experience, right? Not to take care of me, but to connect and be aware of what's going on. Perhaps this person isn't even aware of the impact that they're having on you, right? And vice versa. And that what creates more safety in the relationship. That's what creates more communication. And that's what starts to strengthen this bubble of intimacy where both of you can live with your inner children in this relationship that is nurturing, nourishing, and can potentially start to heal until the inner children are healthy in a way that they get their needs fulfilled. They've released those painful experiences of early childhood when their needs were not met, right? And then they had all these stories built around those experiences. My needs aren't important. I'm not welcomed. It's my fault. People leave me because I'm unlovable, right? Like all these stories that our inner children. And so this is why it's so important to just have a distinction between our needs and our desires. Because once your needs are met, for example, desire for intimacy, right? There's certain things that are required for that, right? Need for safety, right? Need to be seen, acknowledged, a need for consistency. Like all those needs need to be there. And then when you feel that your needs are satisfied, now your heart can relax and then your desire starts to grow. Now you have fuel in the tank and now the car can drive wherever you want to go. And that's the biggest difference. Um, And once your needs are met, then your desires also take a different form. So, for example, if your need for belonging or your need for love, feel loved, um, if that need is not satisfied, now the desire is going to be compensatory, either for drugs or sex, right? So promiscuity oftentimes it shadows or encapsulates that pain of not belonging or feeling unloved. So the desire for sex is actually a way to try to satisfy that need that's underneath. So that desire isn't actually a pure desire, it's a compensatory desire. Okay? So it's important to understand that when you do have these desires, what's driving these desires, right? So desire for to be alone, for example, a desire to live a life without relationship, right? Now that desire could also be covering up the pain of uh, not being considered for your own space, your own needs. And so when you feel used, when you feel abused, when you feel neglected, when you feel that people don't really care about you, then of course you're going to have a desire to be alone, right? And then that desire is going to feel good for a time. Um, but when you really go underneath and you see that that desire is actually being driven by pain, now you know that that desire might not be the best. You can explore it, of course, but be very curious what's underneath, right? When those needs are met, when you do feel you belong, when you do feel safe, when you do feel that you're important, that people care about you, from that place, of course, your desire might shift into wanting to be with someone, right? Because that's a positive experience to want to be with someone who cares about you, who doesn't like want to use you or take advantage of you. From that, you build a desire to connect with this person. And as you connect with this person, then you might have a desire to share this love that you share between one another with a child, right? And then that child becomes an experience of desire, which is very different than a desire for a child because you're missing something within yourself. Like you're missing being loved. And so you have a desire for a child so that the child can love you, right? So that's again a covering desire that's based on missing need that's inside. So before you move towards a desire, it's always important to take a look at what's underneath and how are those needs, those basic needs, how are they are met in relationship to this desire, right? And is this desire an actual desire for like expansion because my needs are met and now I want something more? Or is it a desire of avoidance where I don't get my needs met? And so I'm using this desire to try to fill in those empty spaces within me with unhealthy patterns. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Thank you again for your attention. Wishing you lots of love, care for yourselves, humility in your life, and with your loved ones. Till next time, take care.